All right, good morning. I'm Greg Evans with the Florida Department of Transportation. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you also for participating in the previous webinar on the online GIS tool along with avoidance and attraction areas. We appreciated the discussion we had that day and the feedback you provided. We've incorporated your input to adjust the format of today's webinar, which seems to be running much smoother. I also want to thank the many task force members who have taken the time in the past few weeks to participate in the technical briefings with staff. I know staff are still scheduling these briefings with a few of you. Hopefully these briefings have been helpful to you and as you think about the avoidance and attraction areas and developing guiding principles for the study area. We will provide an updated tool and layers prior to our next in-person meeting. The same tool is available online to the public, so I want to encourage members of the public to review and provide their suggestions as well. I also want to thank the many members of the public who provided their public comments during the last webinar, as well as those who continue to provide comments by email, letters, or other formats. I want to continue to emphasize how important it is to have this input from the public in this process. Public comment during our meetings and webinars is only one way that the public can provide input. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. We have received many questions about when our next in-person meeting may take place. The sooner the better, my opinion. At this point, we are abiding by the Governor's Executive Order number 20-112, Safe, Smart, Step-by-Step Plan for Florida's Recovery. We anticipate scheduling our next in-person meeting once we are at the stage where we can convene groups of our size. Our intent is for the remaining task force meetings to occur in person. We will be in touch with you as soon as we have the details about when these meetings might occur. Our intent is to resume the face-to-face task force meetings when executive orders allow. We know there may still be travel restrictions based on personal concerns or organizational policies. We will work toward a solution that will accommodate the task force and the public. The webinar series that we're in now is designed to keep the task force members engaged in important topics while being mindful of time commitments. As you'll see, our content duration is kept to about an hour, followed by task force Q&A and public comment. Again, we're always excited to keep public engagement with the best methods we can employ at this time, and we'll appreciate the task force and the public's patience as we continue to improve. I want to take just a brief minute to thank all the staff for all their hard work to make these webinars possible. Thank you to staff. Also, I want to say thank you to each task force member for participating today. And I also want to say that for each of us to stay healthy, to you, your family, and your community. Now I want to ask our facilitator, Greg, to make a few announcements. Greg, you did such a great job last webinar. Your expectations are mighty high today, my friend. Take it away, Greg.
I'll try not to disappoint. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great that we are able to meet again and see each other. I say see each other very loosely, even though it's a virtual meeting and not yet in person. But the purpose of today's webinar is to provide some additional background information to you on another topic. And today we're going to be talking about emerging technology trends. The MCOR statute encourages consideration of autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicle technology, as well as mobility as a service. And we've not spent a lot of time on these topics at our meetings, so we'd like to take some time today to give you some background information on these important topics. The agenda includes a brief presentation from FDOT staff, followed by a panel discussion on potential opportunities for using these technologies to support a major transportation corridor such as the Suncoast corridor. Like with other subject matter experts during our in-person meetings, we want to encourage you to take this time to ask questions and to consider the implications of these technologies for the corridor high-level needs and guiding principles. I'm now going to talk about the public comment period, logistics for the webinar, meeting objectives, the agenda, and provide a brief Florida Sunshine reminder. The public comment period begins at 10:45 a.m. or as soon as the agenda items are completed. Requests to comment that were received by 5 p.m. yesterday will be addressed during the public comment period in the order that they were received. When your name is called, we will unmute your line in order for you to provide comment within your allotted time of 3 minutes. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute yourself before speaking. If you did not submit your request in time to be able to speak today, please feel free to email your comments to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. The webinar is being recorded and will be available with other materials on the MCOR's website. You will remain, task force members, you will remain muted for the entirety of the presentations, and we will unmute you one at a time during the Q&A period. Again, only one task force member will be unmuted at a time. If you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. For the question and answer period, we will unmute all task force members one at a time for a single round. Please do not put the webinar on hold or take another call, as we will hear your hold music. And then one last note, we may have adjusted your username in order to readily identify you as a task force member in order to unmute your lines. So please do not make any changes to this username so that you may be heard during the roll call and the Q&A period. The objectives for today are shown on this slide: to receive a briefing on emerging technology trends and opportunities, discuss implications of emerging technologies for corridor development, and to receive public comments. This slide shows the today's agenda and the times for everything. Public comment period is scheduled to begin at 10:45 or as soon as the agenda items are completed. We have received 24 responses to speak, which will take us approximately a little over an hour to work through. And so we hope that all task force members will be able to stay on the line today. Today we have a short reminder here, like the last webinar, of the government and sunshine requirements. Generally speaking, task force members should not communicate either verbally, through email, or through a third party to another task force member on items under consideration by the task force. You may communicate, however, on matters unrelated to task force topics. David Flynn from the Office of the Attorney General is on the webinar today as well and can answer any questions regarding sunshine law as it relates to the task force when we get to the Q&A part of the agenda. All task force members were given unique links to sign in. As task force members logged in today, we did note their attendance. I'll now read through your names and organizations and note who is present and who is not in attendance. If you are a substitute and we didn't recognize your attendance, please send an email to Ryan Asmus at ryan.asmus@dot.state.fl.us. Also, if we inadvertently missed your attendance in here and you are a task force member in attendance today, please also email Ryan at that same email address. I'll now begin going through the attendance as we noted just a few seconds ago. Greg Evans, from the chairman of the task force from the Florida Department of Transportation, is present today. Jason Peters from the Florida Department of Transportation was not able to be with us today. Chris Wynn from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is with us today on the webinar. Mark Futrell from the Florida Public Service Commission is with us on the webinar today. Tim Vanderhoof, representing Enterprise Florida, was not able to be with us today. Commissioner Jeff Kennard, representing the Hernando Citrus Metropolitan Planning Organization, was not able to be with us today either. Scott Coombs, representing the North Central Florida Regional Planning Council, is on the webinar today, as is Charles Lee, representing the Audubon, Florida. Kent Wimmer, representing Defenders of Wildlife, is also on the call webinar today, as is Commissioner Scott Carnahan, representing the Citrus County Commission. Commissioner Anthony Adams, representing Lafayette County Commission, is not able to be on the call today. Diane Head, representing Career Source Florida, is on the webinar today. Paul Myers, representing the Florida Department of Health, was not able to be with us today on the webinar. Commissioner Mark Hatch, from representing Dixie County Commission, was not able to be with us today on the webinar. Janet Bowman, representing the Nature Conservancy, is on the webinar today with us, as is Commissioner Pam Fiegel, representing Taylor County Commission. Also, Chris Lee, representing the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, is in attendance today. Lyle Siegler, representing the Northwest Florida Water Management District, is also in attendance, as is Sherilyn Pickles, representing Madison County. She's also with us today. Representing the Southwest Florida Water Management District is Michelle Hopkins, and she is on the call webinar today. Commissioner Ronald Kitchen, representing the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, is on the webinar in attendance today. Christopher Emanuel, representing the Florida Chamber of Commerce, is in attendance today. Commissioner Todd Gray, representing Gilchrist County Commission, is also in attendance on the webinar today, as is Ken Armstrong from representing the Florida Trucking Association. He is on the call today. Mary Cross, representing the Florida Department of Education, is on the webinar today. Randy Wilkerson, representing Florida Rural Water Association, is on the webinar today, as is Chris Bailey, representing the Florida Internet and Television Association. Commissioner Kristen Dozier, representing the Capital Region Transportation Planning Agency, is on the webinar today. Commissioner Matt Brooks from Levy County, representing Levy County Commission, was not able to be on the call with us today. Susan Ramsey, representing the Florida Economic Development Council, is on the webinar with us today. Gary Ritter, who is a substitute for Charles Shin, representing the Florida Farm Bureau Federation, is on the webinar today. Chris Stahl from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection was not able to be with us today. Dr. Laurence Barrett from the Florida Gateway College is on the webinar today, as is James Stansbury, representing the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, who is substituting today for Brian McManus. James is on the webinar today. John Groskoff from the North Florida Community College was not able to be with us today. Chris Rito from the Appalachia Regional Planning Council is on the webinar today, as is Thomas Hawkins from Thousand Friends of Florida. He is on the call with us today. Commissioner Betsy Barfield from Jefferson County Commission is on the webinar today, as is Ashley Stefanik from the Swanee River Water Management District. She's on the webinar. Pegeen Hanrahan from representing the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is on the webinar today. And last but not least, Ms. Audrey Kidwell, representing Volunteer Florida, is also on the webinar today. Now that all the formalities are completed, I'll hand it over to Raj Panaluri, Connected Vehicle and Arterial Management Engineer at FDOT, who will take us through today's presentation. Raj?
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Good morning, everyone. It is a privilege to present on Florida DOT's CAV, or Connected and Automated Vehicle Program. My name is Raj Panaluri. I'm the state's Connected Vehicle and Arterial Management Engineer. Florida Department of Transportation's vision is to provide a congestion-free and a fatality-free transportation system. About 94% of crashes are attributed to human error. Our goal is to apply technology for driving towards Vision Zero. Florida DOT has developed and adopted a connected and automated vehicle business plan in the year 2019. This document was developed in partnership with several entities from across the state and in coordination with the Federal Highway Administration. This document draws upon the department's Florida Transportation Plan, the Florida strategic intermodal system plan, the strategic highway safety plan, the transportation system management operations strategic plan, and other plan documents. The program's goal is to make it cut across vehicle types and technology types. So the Florida DOT's CAV business plan, as we call it, has 7 focus areas. Policies and governance speaks to the institutionalization and a framework to plan, design, and deploy emerging technologies. Program funding, on the other hand, discusses prioritization, opportunities, and resource needs. Education outreach, on the other hand, presents a need for unified messaging, increased awareness about technology, and workforce development. Industry outreach, on the other hand, discusses industry collaboration and strategic partnerships. Technology standards and specifications development assists with the need for infrastructure preparedness, while implementation readiness focuses on the need for technology and a technology-ready environment in the state of Florida. Lastly, deployment and implementation is the ultimate goal, and this is necessary to realize the safety and mobility benefits to be gained from technology implementation. The key infrastructure initiatives in the state of Florida include the signal phase and timing projects, or as they are usually called, the SPAT projects. They are in Tallahassee, Gainesville, and Pinellas County. And also the I-75 FRAME project. FRAME stands for Florida's Regional Advanced Mobility Element, which extends from Alachua County to Ocala. Often questions come up about connected, automated, and autonomous. So let me touch real quick on what these things really stand for. Connected vehicles refer to applications, services, and technology that can connect a vehicle with its surroundings. For example, connected vehicles are aware of their environment, in other words, what happens around them. So it is all about hearing and communication. Automated vehicles, on the other hand, are those that are equipped with technology, sensors, and other features which have the ability to provide safety alerts to drivers and act on their own, so that the drivers can actually act on the input. And typically, autonomous vehicles, on the other hand, are capable of sensing their environment and navigating along the travel path without any human input or intervention. Autonomous is all about seeing, detecting, and acting. Lastly, currently there are 25 initiatives in the state of Florida. Some are through collaboration with external entities, such as the Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority in Tampa. In terms of concept, this is an interesting project, which is just an example. This project provides an example of how Florida DOT plans to develop and implement bicycle pedestrian safety and other similar efforts. So passively detecting pedestrians and bringing about changes to a traffic signal or at mid-block crosswalks will be explored in a project like this one. Promoting multimodalism with a focus on bicycle pedestrian safety, freight, and transit. These are important elements of projects of this type. Several other projects are being developed with the main goal of safety and enhancing mobility for all the road users and inspiring innovation. These kind of projects help reduce vehicle speeds, vehicle delays, and also therefore reduce vehicular emissions to promote air quality and bring about environmental improvements. Lastly, these projects provide opportunities to deploy emerging technologies and provide a safe and efficient transportation system for all road users. What you see are just a few of the field technology equipment. So these are some of the examples that are typically on the roadside. For example, these devices provide connectivity to vehicles and various modes. They enable technology implementation, and these units, for example, the roadside units, onboard units, etc., from these devices, we can collect data and information and broadcast the same detail to promote safety and mobility for all transportation users. Florida is supporting the electric vehicles and shared mobility in a significant way. So Florida DOT provides knowledge, information, and support on automated, connected, electric, and shared program. What this boils down to is that we define shared mobility as the most important goal, which means that we encompass a variety of transportation modes, including car sharing, bike sharing, peer-to-peer ride sharing, and on-demand ride services, microtransit, and other modes. Florida DOT is building partnerships with shared mobility technology providers and so that we can offer services to all transportation users. Here's a slide on what is called V2x Data Exchange Platform. V2x stands for Vehicle to Everything. So the V2x Data Exchange Platform collects the data from connected vehicle devices, some of which you've seen in the previous slide. It packages that information and then disseminates this information to car companies and other users. This is to provide traveler and traffic information in real time to reduce traffic crashes and improve vehicular flows on the roadways. Security Credential Management System, on the other hand, provides an initial security platform with message content and source of the messages. The TAPS LA, which stands for Technology Applications Partnership with Local Agencies, is a partnership Florida DOT is engaged with local agencies. This is coming soon. Florida DOT is also working on an industry outreach called the iStreet in partnership with the University of Florida. Freight is one of the most important elements. So freight is being considered as a thrust area at the Florida Department of Transportation. FDOT plans to explore the use of technology to support the freight industry. This will help to improve travel times and advance safety systems. Lastly, technologies similar to those that are discussed on the previous slides can be applied here and also with freight in a significant way. From a work zone perspective, developing and implementing work zones with technology applications is a thrust area. Providing real-time information to both motorists and the workers in the work zone will help reduce crashes and improve mobility. What you see is actually a small video clip. While the video clip is running, I'll speak. This video shows an autonomous truck which is equipped with an attenuator, which is usually in the work zones. It can operate without a driver and it follows a lead vehicle. And this work has the potential to significantly reduce workplace injuries and save lives. And Florida DOT is engaged in this work. We want to thank you for the opportunity to present on this Florida DOT's technology program. Technology offers a lot of great value to maximize safety and mobility benefits and to optimize our roadway infrastructure. Thank you very much, and I now turn it back to Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Now we're going to go into the panel discussion. Today, in addition to Raj, we have 4 emerging technology experts who have agreed to participate and answer questions that the task force members may have. Like at previous meetings, they will provide a brief description of their backgrounds and their areas of expertise. With us today, we have the following experts. Trey Talander, Director of FDOT Traffic Engineering and Operations. Dr. Lily Leftiernado, Director of the University of Florida Transportation Institute. Doug Kettles, Director of Central Florida Clean Cities Coalition. And Jovan Zagajec, Technology Manager in the Ford Smart Mobility Division of Ford Motor Company. We'll begin with Trey, who will provide a brief description of his area of expertise. Trey?
Thank you, Greg. Good morning. As Greg mentioned, I'm the Florida Department of Transportation's Director of Traffic Engineering and Operations, and also State Traffic Operations Engineer. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about FDOT's Connected and Automated Vehicle Initiative, and I will pick up where Raj left off and describe some connected and automated vehicle projects pertinent to the Suncoast Connector. I'll start off with the high-level objectives, applications, and benefits of FDOT's Connected and Automated Vehicle Initiative. I'll then go through some of FDOT's CAV projects, beginning with some regional efforts and diving down into some local CAV projects. The objectives of FDOT's Connected and Automated Vehicle Initiative are safety, mobility, and economic development. Every FDOT CAV project strives to achieve these objectives, consistent with the department's mission and vision. The CAV program's vision is a fatality-free and congestion-free transportation system. I do want to emphasize our safety objective. For every CAV effort, we always start with asking, what can we do to improve safety? This slide shows the 2018 crash numbers and fatalities statewide and for the Suncoast connector area. Data from the U.S. Department of Transportation tells us that 94% of the time, the reason for a traffic crash is the human driver. Since traditional safety countermeasures typically deal with the roadway and not the human, they can only improve safety so much. We feel that to get to zero fatalities, we must implement innovative technologies like connected and automated vehicles. Connected and automated vehicle technology has a wide range of applications, and here are a few examples on this slide. Emergency vehicle preemption reduces delay for emergency vehicles. Freight signal priority improves travel time for trucks by reducing delay at traffic signals. And autonomous shuttles have great potential to increase transportation mobility, particularly for the elderly, low income, and disabled. Florida is one of the most advanced states regarding the implementation of connected and automated vehicle technology. This state map is on the FDOT's website and shows the many CAV projects that we are involved in. In the next 3 slides, I'll go into some of the regional and local projects. One of the largest CAV efforts in Florida and the country is FDOT's FRAME initiative. FRAME stands for Florida's Regional Advanced Mobility Elements. There are currently 4 FRAME projects in Florida, 2 on I-75, 1 on I-4, and 1 on US 41 in Southwest Florida. Closest to the Suncoast connector area, I-75 FRAME in Gainesville and Ocala will bring safety and mobility benefits to I-75 travelers, as well as users of the arterial corridors that parallel I-75. These experiences can be applied back to the connector corridor. Florida's transportation system has seen a significant increase in commercial vehicle truck traffic over the years. Florida's rest areas and way stations experience overflow parking at some locations, while others remain underutilized. This led FDOT to develop a statewide truck parking availability system to assist truck drivers in identifying available parking locations. This parking information is displayed on roadside dynamic message panels and is accessible through the Florida 511 website and phone apps. We are also working with third-party app providers to get the parking information displayed in vehicle inside the truck cab. This slide shows a few of the pertinent CAV projects that could be leveraged by the Suncoast connector. In addition to the I-75 project, there are the signal phasing and timing projects in Gainesville and along US 90 in Tallahassee. The SPAT application is enabled by equipment on traffic signals. This allows vehicle-to-infrastructure communication and can provide safety benefits such as reduced red light running. You will hear about some of the Gainesville CAV projects, including the autonomous shuttle on I Street, shortly from Dr. Lilly. I hope this gives you a taste of the potential for connected and automated vehicle technologies to improve transportation safety and mobility. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Trey. All right, so we've heard from a couple of folks at FDOT. Now let's go outside. Next, we're going to hear from outside of FDOT, Dr. Lily Alefriado, who is from the University of Florida Transportation Institute, and she will provide a brief description of her area of expertise.
Good morning. My name is Lily Alefriado. I'm the director of the University of Florida Transportation Institute and a professor in civil engineering. I want to thank the Florida Department of Transportation and the organizers for inviting me to speak about the I Street real-world testbed. It's a very exciting time for transportation with autonomy, connectivity, sensors, and big data analytics. I Street is a collaboration between FDOT, the City of Gainesville, and the University of Florida. And it's a real-world testbed for developing, implementing, and evaluating various advanced technologies. The idea about I Street originated in 2016 when we began to develop a strategic plan We completed the plan in September 2017. It was a project that was funded by FDOT. I'll share some of the highlights of our ongoing projects that are part of iStreet. But I want to say a few words about Gainesville. Why Gainesville for this test bed? It's an ideal place for testing. We have pedestrians, we have bicycles, scooters, a very well used transit system, younger population, more amenable to using advanced technologies. One of our important projects is the autonomous vehicle shuttle in the downtown Gainesville. This video shows the shuttle when it was mapping the route in downtown Gainesville before it began operating. And as you see, the bicyclist runs along while the shuttle is getting ready to pull over and the vehicle stops. This vehicle, the autonomous shuttle, uses onboard sensors, as Raj Pranaluri mentioned earlier, to detect obstacles and to stop quickly as needed. This is the type of technology we hope will be deployed on all vehicles to reduce crashes. And by the way, the EV shuttle started operating on February 3rd, but it's now on hold temporarily. As part of the iStreet, there's now extensive instrumentation around the UF campus and Gainesville streets, which allows for several mobility and safety applications based on connectivity. There's instrumentation along I-75, shown there on the left, which is part of the FRAME project I mentioned earlier. Top center around UF, bottom center on campus for evaluating the pedestrian safety related applications mentioned earlier. We're also leveraging other resources to increase the impact of iStreet. So for example, this video is related to a project that's funded by the National Science Foundation, where we use sensors to detect vehicle arrivals and optimize signal control. We detect vehicles arriving, we calculate what the best path is to minimize delay and travel time. We send it to the vehicle. What you see in the dots are the optimal path that we calculate, and then the lines show the actual path. So this works with autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, and it can also
Muted.
Conventional vehicles.
Unmuted.
Another project is a partnership of the University of Florida with the city of Gainesville, where again we received the National Science Foundation funding to develop algorithms for using video to detect near misses. This allows us to evaluate an intersection without waiting for crashes to happen. So, and we're seeking industry partnerships. We're working with several companies that have an interest in iStreet. So I want to close by inviting you to come visit us in Gainesville when allowed, learn more about iStreet, which is a unique partnership really around the country that aims to improve mobility and safety while also partnering with industry and through leveraging resources. Thanks again for the invite. Looking forward to responding to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lilly. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Doug Kettles, who is the director of Central Florida Clean Cities Coalition. He will also provide a brief description of his area of expertise. Doug?
Well, thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to present on one of the MCOR corridors. I'm with Clean Cities of Central Florida. We are a U.S. Department of Energy program that has been in existence for a little over 25 years. We work in sustainable and alternative fuels, but we also work in transportation technologies such as automated and connected and mobility. We have 4 other coalitions in Florida, one in the Tampa area, one in Miami, and one in Jacksonville, and then the one for Central Florida. And we're part of a network of a little over 90 Clean Cities coalitions that are scattered across the United States. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share some information about our work a project we have going on here with the Florida Office of Energy. We are working on an EV roadmap for Florida, where this is part of a project that the Energy Office started, and we are in as a consultant, and it's based on the background that we have in the alternative fuel corridor nominations. FDOT just submitted in August a nomination for all of the interstates in Florida to be designated as alternative fuel corridors. That has the potential of providing some funding for those alternative fuels and sustainable fuels in our corridors in Florida. But it is also part of a national network that is security related and hopefully will help us move more towards energy independence in the future. Our objectives for the EV roadmap are to gather best practices and information and catalog them. We're going to develop some high-level EV infrastructure models for placing facilities in along the corridors. We're going to also focus on evacuation routes given the upcoming hurricane season, make some recommendations on that. We're going to do an infrastructure deployment plan for the first 3 years of the scope of this initiative, in which we will do recommendations for siting of EV charging stations. Again, those will be high-level charging stations, usually a DC fast level charger. They're not going to be hard, fast recommendations, but a recommendation for an area, let's say with a radius of about 5 miles. We'll do a pure infrastructure forecast also for the remaining years. That's a quantitative analysis that simply will address the number of DC fast chargers or other types of charging that we anticipate will be needed in Florida during that time frame. And we have a final report that's due at the end of the year, and we will be posting on the Energy website. So the EV roadmap is, as I mentioned earlier, is collaborate and contribute. We have a diverse set of collaborators. You can see the folks that we have there. We're going to organize the data by FDOT district. We talked with FDOT, and we also looked at how we could manage this data the most effectively. Managing on a statewide basis was difficult to say the least. Managing it on a county basis is got its challenges too. So what we will be doing is organizing this information by FDOT districts. And we felt like that was just about the right size, if you want to call it the right temperature porridge. But we will be organizing this information by district. We have webinars that we are doing. We have another one this afternoon. I think there's a schedule on the next slide, so you'll get to see that. And then we have ongoing individual collaboration with stakeholders and others that would like to become involved in the process from April and through September. These are some of the considerations. There's quite a few of them. This is going to be a high-level report of best practices. So when you see these considerations here, we're going to touch on each of those, and we're going to provide as much as we can in current recommendations for those areas. But these technologies are advancing very quickly, and they're going to be coming on very quickly. And so we will give some of these topics a very deep dive, and in some of the other ones, we will make recommendations on how to approach them in the future. An example would be vehicles with longer range. Vehicles with longer range right now mean extra batteries, which means a longer dwell time at the charging location, depending on what its power output is. So you can see there's a whole list of considerations there that we're going to go into and work through with each of our interest groups and see if we can collect all the best practices that are out there now, provide a reference location for future information, and start a plan that will germinate a conversation about how do we do this. Electric vehicles are going to happen. They're going to reach price parity in the very near future, and basically what will happen is the fiduciary responsibility aspect of a lot of organizations will begin to take over, and we'll see that is really what will drive EV adoption and EV transportation in all modes. This is the stakeholder interest group webinar that we're going to be having. As I said, we have a power interest group one this afternoon. And then you can see the schedule for the rest of the interest groups. We will finish those up here in the middle of June, but then we will use that time to go back and talk with folks and to continue and broaden the discussion with other participants through the end of September, maybe a little bit into early October, because it simply will take a lot of time to collect all of this information. We will be posting interim reports. Bringing it all together in a final report is a pretty daunting task, and so we know we're going to need to get started on that in early October to get it done by December. Here is our contact information. Caitlin Reed is our project manager for this project. You can contact her there, and then you see my information there. You can contact me if you have any questions. We're looking forward to it. And we are going to do it in conjunction with these MCOR corridors in mind. So this has been a wonderful opportunity for us to participate. Like I said, here's our contact information. If you'd like to become a collaborator or have additional questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Last today, from our panelists, we're going to hear from Mr. Jovan Zagietz, who is with the Ford Smart Mobility division with Ford Motor Company, and he will also provide a brief description of his background. So, Jovan?
Thank you, Greg, and good morning, all. As Greg indicated, I'm with Ford Motor Company, where my primary responsibility is to keep an eye on emerging vehicle connectivity, and when appropriate, bring new connected vehicle technologies into our products. At Ford, we believe, as many in the transportation industry do in fact, that vehicle connectivity is one of the key enablers for addressing the mobility and safety challenges that today we collectively face. Moreover, we believe that vehicle-to-everything technology is the next chapter in the evolution of vehicle connectivity. Previous speakers have described some of the salient characteristics and potentials of the connected vehicle technology, so I'm not going to spend much of your time on that. Suffices to say that we have been working with our peers and the U.S. Department of Transportation on this since the early 2000s, and we are convinced in its value proposition. It is for this reason, as this slide is showing, that we are aggressively expanding our core cellular-based connectivity across the Ford lineup. We will have 100% of new vehicles in the US connected and more than 90% of new global vehicles connected by 2020, by this year. We are undertaking the fundamental change in electrical vehicle architecture so that beginning in this year, our new vehicles will be capable over-the-air updates for the key modules and systems such as the powertrain and body control modules. This will allow us to maintain our vehicles up to date and safe. We are also committed to deploying Cellular V2x technology in the US in all our new vehicle models beginning in 2022, provided the regulatory environment is conducive to do so. I mentioned Cellular V2x Technology. So what is that? Well, cellular and Cellular V2x is a bit of a misnomer. When people think of cellular devices, what comes to their mind first are cell towers, SIM cards, and expensive data plans. Cellular V2x Technology does provide the traditional network connectivity that we have in smartphones and many vehicles on the road already. But in addition to that, they also feature a direct mode of communication in which vehicles can talk directly to other vehicles and their surroundings, like traffic lights and vulnerable road users, without needing cell towers or data plans to function, much like walkie-talkies do. With these two modes, we plan to enable our vision of smart vehicles in a smart world, which at Ford is our North Star. We are very excited about working with advanced states like yours that understand this potential and are willing to collaborate with us on delivering a future of smarter, safer, and more efficient mobility. Finally, I want to thank you for the opportunity to tell you about our plans, and I'm looking forward to any questions you may have about our connected vehicle efforts.
Hey, good morning. This is Will Watts, Chief Engineer for FDOT, and I've got Wei Shin, Chief Planner, is here with me. We certainly want to thank the panel for your time and expertise today. It's exciting to see how quickly these technologies are changing and the possibilities this creates for us, especially on the MCOR program. As we mentioned in the start of the meeting, most of the pilot projects and early deployment in Florida will be in the urban area so far, but you have the opportunity here to provide guidance. How do we explore these technologies for the study area? Let me share a few questions that we may want to ask ourselves. How could we improve safety by reducing the number of crashes if we reduce driver error and enable more rapid responses? How could we improve mobility if we were able to get word out to motorists about rerouting options more quickly? How could we improve commercial vehicle traffic and safety by providing truck drivers with real-time information? So this is a real opportunity for us to think about it and ask how we would like these corridors and these areas to function in the future. You have a great panel of experts here, so task force, take advantage of that. And Greg, we're ready for questions.
All right, so task force members, what we're going to do is we're going to go down through the list. What I'll try to do just to kind of keep everyone engaged and make for sure you know where you're at in the batting order, if you will. I'll call out 3 folks just to kind of have you on the ready, and then we'll come to you one by one. Like I said, we will unmute your line. Please make for sure when we come to you, if you have self-muted your line, if you would please unmute that so we can hear your question. But anyway, this slide shows all of our panelists that we have here, and obviously they're available for questions, as well as Will Watts, Wei Shin, and Ryan Asmus, FDOT production lead for Suncoast, is also with us today. So, all right, the first 3 we've got is Chairman Secretary Greg Evans. We'll also have Chris Wynn and Mark Futrell. So, Secretary Evans, representing FDOT, do you have any questions for the panelists today?
Greg, thank you. And I just want to say, express my appreciation to all the panel members for taking the part of our day today. And Jovan, I want to just tell you that I am a Ford pickup truck owner, sir.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, so, and that is, I did want to clarify for any of the task force members, if you are a Chevy or a Dodge person, they will, Jovan will still answer your questions, okay? It's okay, and he may route you to your nearest Ford dealership for maybe the specials going on now, but nonetheless. Chris Wynn, representing Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Chris, do you have any questions today?
Yeah, this is Chris. I really appreciate this exciting and very informative overview of emerging technologies. With respect to wildlife, you know, we're starting to see some use of new technology, particularly in South Florida, to help reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, which is helping out, you know, with our safety goals. Also interested in some new technologies to alert drivers about smoke hazards as a result of wildfires and prescribed burning efforts. Would just generally like to kind of throw it out and see if maybe there's one panel member that has had some experience with looking at new technologies related to wildlife, and particularly as we think about guiding principles. I'd really like to see Florida, be a leader in using new technologies that are going to help out our wildlife populations. Thank you.
Panelist, Trey, do you want to start that off?
Sure. Thank you, Chris, for the question. The same technologies that help vehicles sense, say, pedestrians or bicyclists could be applied to wildlife as well, especially in the autonomous area. And regarding the, we just had, of course, the bad fire on I-10 where I-10 was closed. And we were able to use our intelligent transportation system on I-10 to help route traffic around that. But on the CAV side, certainly that kind of information will also be in the vehicle, either through our infrastructure where we can detect smoke and fog and smog, which is a challenge to detect, but that can be fed to the vehicle. Also, from vehicle to vehicle communication, there's things like, a vehicle sensing windshield wipers knows that it's raining, for example, and that information can be shared amongst vehicles.
All right, Jovan?
Yeah, just to add to that, if you think about the potential that connected vehicle technology has to transmit real-time and accurate information when it's really needed, that's really what we are after here. So if a vehicle in front of you can see or sense something, it can transmit that information to the vehicles around it to alert them of something that they may not see, but it's right there in front of them that they should be paying attention to. Whether the vehicle is autonomous or not, whoever the driver is, that's still a very valuable piece of information for the driving system.
All right, very good. Thank you all. Thank you, panelists. We'll move on. Mark Futrell from the Florida Public Service Commission. Mark, do you have any questions today?
Good morning. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to comment that our agency have been monitoring electric vehicles for roughly 10 years, and as well as the impact of charging on the electric grid. We look forward to participating in the development of this technology and the impact of charging on the provision of electric service going forward. So thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Mark. All right, next three in line of task force members are going to be Scott Coons, Charles Lee, and Kent Wimmer. So representing North Central Florida Regional Planning Council, Scott Coons. Scott, do you have any questions today for the panelists?
Thank you, Greg. I have no questions, but appreciate the update. Very exciting to hear about the potential for automating connected vehicles to improve mobility and, more importantly, improve safety on our highways.
Very good. Charles Lee, representing Audubon, Florida. Charles, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do have a question of the panelists. Before I do that, though, I want to ask you, Mr. Chairman, I have two other questions / comments that I'd like to make during the course of today's meeting that do not relate to this panel discussion. I'd like you to let me know whether I should do that now after I've dealt with the question for the panelists, or whether there will be another slot on the agenda when I can do that today.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. So let's stick with the subjects that we've covered with this panelists can respond. We'll open up the mic for additional comments, questions to the task force, provided that time is allotted. We really want to get to our public comment period at 10:45, as close to that as possible, but we'll try to accommodate you as best we can, sir.
Okay, please do note I have a couple of other brief questions. The question for the panelist is, as we as task force members are looking at the guiding principles to be developed by the task forces, and consequently looking at things like the potential direction and route of corridors, as well as the potential width of ultimate corridors and right-of-way envelopes. What considerations do these new technologies bring into play with regard to those matters? In other words, what messages would you have for us with regard to the width of corridors and right-of-way envelopes? What messages would you have for us with regard to the choices of paths for corridors as they would relate to these new emerging technologies? Are there any metrics you can share with us? And then the final part of that is with regard to surface roads as opposed to bridge sections. To provide for environmental protection and enhancement, one of the things that is sort of on the upswing is to provide for longer bridges over wetlands and wildlife corridors. What implications do transcending to a bridge section have for these technologies in terms of deployment of the electronics, et cetera?
Raj, do you want to start with that?
Yes, Craig, thank you. Thank you for the great question, sir. Emerging technologies are actually becoming a key part of infrastructure development. So your question is very timely and important. And as you rightly noted, when we start making these investments in emerging technologies, we all want to see a good return on investment in terms of safety and mobility. So as we start planning and designing these projects, it is probably a good idea to start thinking about where to place these devices. For example, when we talk about roadside units, if we get into more urbanized areas or even in rural areas, for instance, it is a good idea to know whether the spacing of the roadside unit should be 1 mile, half mile type of things. And most of the roadway designers are typically aware of these requirements. Secondly, we also want to look at how to design an intelligent transportation system into the corridor framework itself. So even though we talk emerging technologies, the backbone is really a good intelligent transportation system. And fortunately, ITS, or Intelligent Transportation System, is a beaten track. So roadway designers typically tend to know what to put. And then when we discuss more limited access facilities, we should not forget that the adjoining arterial corridors are also equally important. So upgrading and providing a good traffic signal system would be really important. In other words, in the event there's an incident on the limited access facility, when we push traffic onto the adjoining arterials, the adjoining arterials should be able to handle the traffic. So having good infrastructure preparedness would be key. And back to your question about metrics, it is a good idea to always work backwards and figure out whether we are looking only at vehicular safety or multimodal safety. The goal should be to really promote bicycle pedestrian safety, protect the transit investments we make, so provide transit signal priority within good signal systems, provide a good route parking for freight corridors and whatnot. So all these things become a part of a good technology framework, because at the end of the day, as Ioan and Trey have indicated and earlier on itself, this technology is going to provide real-time information to motorists. And lastly, the question is really a good one about how long the bridge spans should be, etc. Fortunately, technology does not have a lot of constraints. Technology is quite flexible in that depending on what the corridor needs, we can fit it in. So there's a lot of good news happening on the technology front. Industry is making significant advances. So we should be in a good position to do a very active and probably one of the best technology initiatives in Florida compared with anybody else. Thank you, sir. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Raj. Charles, I know you had another question that was beyond to the topic today, but did you have another question about the technology?
The only question I would have about the technology is whether there are constraints or advice to be given on such things as the width of the right-of-way envelope to accommodate the devices that you are dealing with, or whether there are constraints on, say, for example, curvatures that would be beyond the ordinary design constraints that you would see used on a 70-mile-per-hour highway. Does the implication of these technologies say the curves should be easier, or does the implication of these technologies suggest that the curves could perhaps be tighter? Or is there any implication at all in one direction or another as a result of the technologies?
Trey, do you want to handle that, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. This is a tough one. It's something we've thought about a lot, and there's a couple of challenges with this. One, there will be a what we call mixed fleet for a very long time. You know, the turnover for people are holding onto their vehicles longer. They're more reliable. And so while some auto companies are rolling out connected and autonomous technology, it's going to take a while to get a big penetration. So we still have to accommodate all the, you know, the 1978 Ford pickup trucks, right, Jovan? So that are out there for a while. Also, these are developing technologies, and so initially in the early stages, the technologies are still going to be improved. So you won't see things like I don't think you'll see things like very close headways that, you know, maybe in the future when the technology is really good and the penetration rate is very high that you might see. So you'll still need those safe buffer areas of corridor width and width distance between vehicles. You know, I think that's going to be a while. So we still have to accommodate those.
All right, thanks, Trey. All right, so the next task force members I'm going to come to, Kent Wimmer, Commissioner Scott Carnahan, and Diane Head. So representing Defenders of Wildlife is Kent Wimmer. Kent, do you have any questions for panelists today?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. 2 weeks ago, Tim Jackson, transportation planner, wrote an op-ed in the Orlando Sentinel describing the challenging the need to build these highways because of technology and innovations that would allow for traffic to flow much closer together than they are now. And so essentially really debating the need for these corridors and these extra highways, you know, that have a 70-year lifespan. And he's basically suggesting we don't need to build these highways because the technology will be such they'll make them obsolete. Can you please respond to his suppositions?
Raj?
Yes, sir. That is a really great question, sir. Thank you for the question. Actually, when we think about it, technology is really a value add, or it only adds to the infrastructure. So without a good infrastructure, technology in and of itself may not be able to accomplish much. So for instance, we can build a good roadway with the necessary width, with the necessary curvatures and all the necessary roadway design elements. But at the end of the day, technology becomes an enabler. It helps us to move the traffic more efficiently. It provides the right kind of information to the drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, and all transit freight and whatnot. So in other words, technology is really an enabler with communication, with detection, and capabilities to let everybody know about situational awareness. Now, technology by itself will not be able to solve the problem without good infrastructure in place. So we are convinced that for efficient traffic flows, for example, we take traffic signals as a good example. We can have the traffic signals, we can have what are called certain time of day plans, etc. But when technology is in place, we can actually help the vehicles to move more efficiently. In the absence of the traffic signal or intersection itself, obviously safety is going to be a major concern. So I guess the bottom line is a good roadway infrastructure becomes a precursor to achieving many more things we can accomplish, whether through communication, detection, etc. So technology is only an enabler at the end of the day.
Hey, Doug, do you want to address that?
Yes, in a previous life, I was a director of network operations in Central Florida for Bright House and Time Warner, and we built a very sophisticated data and video network. And what I would tell you is that once you have that platform in place, all of the possibilities then start to emerge. We know what some of them are now. We know, from a fundamental point of view, what it is we want to do. What will really surprise people and how this technology and this approach will enable it is the things that will emerge that we haven't thought of, and the possibilities. If you just look at what your mobile phone can do now versus what it can do 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I launched high-speed data for Time Warner in Central Florida, and I was deeply involved in the technology. And someone asked me one day, when do you think we'll be able to watch video on the phone? And I thought about it and said, well, yeah, we will be able to. I think it's going to be a while though, because the compression techniques and such as that aren't right there. We need some better algorithms. 5 years later, we were watching video. I thought it would be 10. So as Raj says, this is really an enabler. There are just so many unknown possibilities and attributes that will help safety. Real-time accident response. We've got someone in an ambulance, okay, that has been in a remote location, been in an accident, and they're on their way. If they're on one of these corridors, the chances are there's going to be a real-time video link that a doctor at the ER can look at the patient in the ambulance in real time and do a triage or a diagnosis and help the EMTs. So, there's just so much potential here. And, when I look at the MCORs and when I look at what's being thought about at Suntrax, the test facility over near Lakeland, FDOT and the folks that are driving these technologies are doing a wonderful job, and we're going to have a premier transportation system in Florida, and it's also going to enable us to do a lot of things in emergency response that we just could not do before. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, good deal. Thank you, panelists. Continuing on, we've got Commissioner Scott Carnahan, Diane Head, and Janet Bowman will be up third next. Commissioner Scott Carnahan, representing Citrus County Commission. Do you have any questions for the panelists today? Commissioner Carnahan, are you there? All right, we'll come back to you. Diane Head, representing Career Source Florida. Diane, do you have any questions today?
Hi, good morning. So my first question was going to be about wildlife, which Chris handled that. I also had a question about designing the lanes and what the vehicles could do there. And Charles handled that. So I was thinking about my commute into work today, and I pass more tractors than cars. So I know that there's, farm equipment is very high tech these days. I don't know, what they can do on the road. I know what they can do in the field, and it's amazing stuff with GPS and everything else, but what that equipment, tractors, etc., can do on the road, because they do have to use the same roadways that we use. what the interaction might be, or, what is the technology there?
Raj, do you want to address that? And then maybe Dr. Lilly, if you want to add anything to what Raj has to say.
Thank you, Greg. Yes, ma'am, great question. Actually, when we talk about technologies, let's start with the word sensors. Sensors are those devices which can actually pick up the location, GPS, for example. Every smartphone is a sensor in and of itself. So if vehicles are equipped with sensors, they can actually tell and provide information back to a centralized database and whatnot about how fast they're moving, their exact location, what kind of, how far they are away from traffic signalized intersections, etc. And this information is powerful because when you talk about tractors, which tend to move at a slightly lower speed than the regular vehicular traffic, that information is powerful. Because when you think about road traffic crashes, a majority of crashes occur due to speed differential. In other words, the difference in the speeds between vehicles. So any tractor that is equipped with a sensor which tells the location, how fast it is moving, etc., in and of itself is of great value to the overall traffic management purpose from a safety and mobility point of view. Secondly, in the agricultural field, technology has been advancing significantly. Kind of veering off real quick, drones, for example, are being extensively used to figure out the crop yields, where the crop is and whatnot, where the equipment is present, etc. So the same kind of technology can be utilized when it comes to trucks as well, from a safety standpoint more than anything else. But to your point, when we talk about Interstate 75, just as an example, or any roadway, for example, a significant number of crashes occur when there's a heavy payload on the roadway. So truck kind of falls into the category, except it is moving at a slower rate of speed. So any information we can collect would be helpful to advance the safety, not just of the tractor and the driving population of the tractors, but also in general, the overall traffic conditions. Last point, when we take railroad is another good example. We don't want any vehicle to be stuck on a rail grade crossing. So when a heavy vehicle like a tractor sits there, that is probably going to be far more dangerous than anything else. So if we can get information about the rail grade crossing and provide that information to a tractor well in advance of time, we probably would be helping. So in other words, the point that is being made is there's numerous ways of addressing an issue once we get into the technology realm, and tractors is probably one of the areas where we can work on. Thank you.
Dr. Lilly, do you have anything you want to add to that, or something that maybe you thought of that Raj didn't cover there?
Yeah, just to add that having the connectivity from the vehicle to other vehicles also warns other drivers who cannot see that the vehicle is there, and so it provides that additional level of warning to other drivers. But Raj is exactly right that the technology is vehicle agnostic. You can have the same type of sensor on any type of vehicle, and hopefully we will see some safety gains from all kinds of vehicles.
All right, very good. Next panelist, next task force member, sorry, that I'm going to come to Janet Bowman, Commissioner Pam Fiegel, and Chris Lee. So we'll start with Janet Bowman representing the Nature Conservancy. Janet, any questions today?
Yes. My question is for Doug Kettles and DOT staff, and that's to talk a little bit about the integration of the EV roadmap with some of DOT's efforts. Particularly since Senate Bill 7018 that just passed charges DOT with coming up with a charging infrastructure master plan, and they're all great efforts, but I'm just interested in how it's all going to be integrated into DOT's planning.
Well, I guess I'll start. What we are doing is we're at the physical layer, and we're looking at infrastructure and what its possibilities are, and how do we move forward. Our project came out of the project that we did for nomination of the alternative fuel corridors in Florida. And so one of our expertise is in GIS and being able to do gap analysis and some other type of analysis for this. You know, we haven't had any lengthy conversations with FDOT about, or the Public Service Commission, and we really don't expect to. This is a separate project, but what we do think it will contribute is all of the physical layer infrastructure information that those two organizations could use to, you know, to fulfill the goals that have been set before them in 7018. So this project actually started at least a half a year before there was any discussion about 7018. So so that is my perspective on how this is going to work. What we're doing is separate. We are going to share that information with everybody, just like we did with the alternative fuel corridors, and we hope it's useful to FDOT and the Public Service Commission and others, but we won't be involved in that part of it.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Doug, and thanks for the question, Janet. Commissioner Pam Fiegel, representing Taylor County Commission. Commissioner Fiegel, any questions today?
Oh, thank you, Greg. I don't really have any questions, but I would like to say that this is all very interesting and that we do look forward to exploring the opportunities this technology will offer our community in the future. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. We'll be going to Chris Lee next. After Chris, I've got on deck Lyle Siegler, Sherilyn Pickles, and Michelle Hopkins. So representing the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation is Chris Lee. Chris, do you have any questions for the panelists today?
I have no questions for the panel, but I would like to thank all the information they gave us regarding this matter, because this is very interesting stuff that we certainly need to be considering based on our decisions of these MCOR corridors.
Very good, thanks, Chris. Law Siegler from Northwest Florida Water Management District. Any questions today? Lyle, are you there? All right, we're going to go on to Sherilyn Pickles, representing Madison County. Sherilyn, any questions today for the panelists?
No questions today, but I just want to thank you all for your time and the effort that you've put into this and this presentation, so thank you.
Thank you, Sherilyn. Michelle Hopkins from the Southwest Florida Water Management District is up next. Michelle, any questions today?
No, any questions I have already been addressed by the previous questions. I appreciate all of the information. It's very interesting.
Very good, thank you. Next three task force members that are up for Q&A is Commissioner Ronald Kitchen, Christopher Emanuel, and Commissioner Todd Gray. So we'll start with representing the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is going to be Citrus County Commissioner Ronald Kitchen. Commissioner, any questions today? Commissioner Kitchen, are you there? Okay, we'll come back with a hand raise if we need to, if he has any questions. Christopher Emanuel from the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Chris, any questions today?
Yes, sir. This has been a great discussion. I sit on the ACES committee at FDOT and can listen to this all day. And Charles Lee kind of touched on two really interesting points. And I've got a question for Lily and Yavat. It strikes me if we were having this conversation in the 1980s or 1990s, one of the siting decisions, all things being equal, might be a consideration of cell phone towers or the orientation around radio towers or something like that. Where do you see the technology going, and does that have any implications for siting decisions in terms of what geographic connectivity issues, orientation of major roadways? Does this technology impose any advantages or limitations on some of those decisions?
Dr. Lilly, I'll go to you first, and then Yvonne, you can follow up.
Okay, I just know enough to be dangerous in this, but I'll tell you that I think that there's different technologies for connectivity. And so what we're doing with iStreet is we're looking at different options for providing this information through Wi-Fi, through cellular, and different types of technologies. So I do not think that that will be a constraint.
Jovan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So maybe I should start just by saying that cellular technology in particular has been evolving over the last 20 years to the point where we now, in addition to the mode where we require cell towers, we also have this direct mode, which does not require any cell towers to be in the vicinity of two vehicles communicating. This is particularly important in rural areas where cell signals may not be good, or you may not even need the cell tower to exchange the safety critical information between vehicles. So I would say that as far as V2x technology goes, that it will have very little impact on the positioning of cell towers and so on. I mean, we're not going to depend on that to provide the safety features that we are going to deliver with V2x.
Very good. Thank you. Good question, Chris. Up next, next coming is going to be Commissioner Todd Gray, Ken Armstrong, and Mary Cross. So representing Gilchrist County Commission, Commissioner Todd Gray. Commissioner Gray, do you have any questions today?
No questions, just thank you to our panel and very informative presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ken Armstrong representing Florida Trucking Association. Ken, you got any questions?
Yes. There's been very little discussion about freight and trucks during the panel presentation. For trucking companies, this is absolutely going to be a return on investment kind of situation, since we are talking about toll roads. That obviously allows dynamic pricing. It allows perhaps easier utilization of platooning technology and other technological advances that particularly larger trucking companies either have already implemented in their vehicles or will soon. And I'd just like to hear any of the panelists comment, if they would like to, on the use of the Suncoast as either a test bed or an opportunity for trucking companies to move their freight more efficiently because of technology possibilities.
Trey, do you want to address that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Ken, for the question. Absolutely. I think that one of the early adopters of connected and automated vehicle technology is going to be trucks, particularly through fleets, just because of the potential early benefit that they can receive. So we see those technologies, and we see some of the ones that we talked about with truck parking availability, freight signal priority that we're going to be implemented along I-75 in the Ocala area, as an example. It's very portable. And most of all the connected vehicle applications that, of course, cars have are directly portable over to trucks as well. Thank you.
Raj, you want to add anything there?
Yes, Greg, thank you. Mr. Armstrong, thank you so much for a great question. We remember you providing great feedback even during the TSM&O's strategic plan development on the freight component. So that was very valuable to us. And in fact, that kind of made us think about how to include freight as a part of the CAV, or the Connected and Automated Vehicle Business Plan. So once again, thank you for that question and for the support we got. So on one of my slides earlier, I did not probably go into a lot of detail, but we have been already thinking about this in the District 4 region, which is South Florida, the Fort Lauderdale area, they're planning to develop a connected freight priority project, where the goal is really to implement priority for the freight vehicles and see how it is going to work on a traffic signal system, for example, and how to reduce the travel times and things of that type. We're also looking into safety and mobility issues. And you brought up a great question about the test bed. And quite frankly, as we go around the state and deploy these projects, we're always looking for good test beds. And we take it, I take it as a cue from you today that maybe we should look at this corridor as a really good opportunity to do some testing, evaluation of the equipment, and bring feedback to the Florida Trucking Association and others on how to make freight a real priority. The other thing we're also doing is identify the top 10 locations of concern from a truck safety perspective in the state of Florida. And the idea, once again, is to start thinking about how we can leverage the emerging technologies. And there's companies out there, so you know that with those companies, we'd like to work closely, collect the data, provide information to them. And there's a V2x data exchange platform. I had a slide on that one. The goal of that program, which is rolling out soon from the Florida DOT, is to collect the data and provide to any party out there. And we think freight would be the #1 focus area because, as we said earlier, freight concerns from a safety standpoint are significant. So not to repeat myself, but as Trey has alluded to, the goal is to bring connectivity to freight, have a two-way communication, get information from freight companies as much as get the information back to the Florida Trucking Association and the partners, and advance both safety and mobility on areas where you see fit. But to your main question, yes, the corridor could be a great test bed going forward. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, panelists, for the answer. All right, we've got about 14 more task force members we want to get through. We do realize, as far as the time, that we are a little bit beyond what we had for the public comment period, but we really wanted to get through this important topic and make for sure our task force members were able to ask questions. So just bear with us a little bit longer, and we'll get to the public comment here very shortly. Up next, we've got Mary Cross, Randy Wilkerson, followed by Chris Bailey and Commissioner Kristen Dozier. So I'll go to Mary first. Mary Cross, representing the Florida Department of Education. Mary, any questions today?
No, I don't have any questions, but I'd also like to thank the panel.
Very good. Thank you for that. Randy Wilkerson, representing Florida Rural Water Association. Randy, it looks like we're still having some audio problems in regards to you accessing things. So if that gets corrected, we'll check it before we wrap up here. Chris Bailey with the Florida Internet and Television Association. Any questions today, Chris?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the wonderful presentation by the panelists. I'd love to hear what their thoughts are as far as how the private sector can help advance some of this technology, particularly with the ISPs, both wired and wireless companies. What role do you think we can play in this advancing this technology, particularly these new corridors?
All right, Dr. Lilly, we'll start with you, and then Doug, I'll let you follow up.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. It is extremely important to involve industry partners, and that's why with iStreet we've had extensive outreach through a request for information to several different partners. Actually, Ford Mobility is one of the partners we've been talking with, but it is essential, and this is kind of rare for the public sector to have this requirement to collaborate with industry, but I think it is essential to bring the two together.
Doug?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a exceptional opportunity for the private industry, especially telecommunications group, which is my background, to work with the FDOT and others. They have a lot of experience in managing bandwidth, which is, going to be a real concern on these corridors, because bandwidth is not infinite, and it does need augmentation. It does need management, and so I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to bring together those providers. They have very good redundant networks, and pair them with partnerships with the FDOT and others in this establishing these what I'll call smart corridors. So there's lots of opportunity there, and cost savings too, because a lot of these folks have their infrastructure in place already, and they have capacity. And even if you have to pay for it, it's not too expensive. So I think there's a real opportunity for partnerships there, and in other areas too, in the telecommunications side.
All right, very good. Thank you, panelists, for that. All right, we're going to go to Commissioner Kristen Dozier, representing the Capital Region Transportation Planning Agency. Commissioner Dozier, do you have any questions today for the panelists?
Thank you. I would also like to thank the panel. This is very interesting, and seems like an update, particularly for those of us at Florida Association of Counties. We've been hearing about the UF studies and a lot of different pieces of this over the years. Like so many have said, a lot of my questions have come up previously, but I guess my big one, Doug, is what you were talking about a minute ago, and others have referenced this, was about the connectivity. We're seeing an area of the state where we have the least connectivity. With the COVID response, we're seeing kids who get laptops and have no internet access. So this is very present in my mind right now, and there's a lot of discussions. So I hear you when you say the CV2X system may not need the cell towers and that type of connectivity. But Doug, you just mentioned the bandwidth, and it does seem like in an area with a lot of older vehicles that may not have new tech, we're going to need some diversity of technology here. And I'm just wondering if the broadband questions, if these other questions intersect with what you all are doing and would pose some challenges in the rural area.
Well, I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's an opportunity, and I know that's what everybody is supposed to say, but I truly do. And I think what might just help just a little bit here is to understand the architecture, because when you start talking about the technologies and you start talking about Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and DSRC and such as those are all more or less protocols that ride on the transport system. So if you can push the transport out there, which is what is being proposed in the C-Core applications, if you can get that, for lack of a better term, that trunking capability out there, then there are other less expensive ways to push that that signal deeper into the population that don't require hardline construction and other expenses. So I think that these are enablers. MCORs are enablers for getting that data and that connectivity out to those rural areas. So I think it's critical that these corridors, will provide that kind of base, trunk technology or trunk capacity, and from there it becomes much less expensive to, distribute it to others. I hope that answered the question. So, and there will be towers. I mean, 5G is going to take them. What Javon was talking about was vehicle-to-vehicle communications, if I remember correctly. But when you start having to network and transport all of this data, you're going to have some towers, and but they're going to be smaller too. So I think maybe Raj wants to pick up here.
Oh no, thank you, Doug. If I could just supplement what you said, great response, thank you. if I can just supplement what you said, the technology is already advancing to the point where they're looking at having micro tower sites. So instead of having the huge tower sites, as and when necessary, wherever you need, you can actually, shall we say, deploy a micro tower site and start communicating. But the key is our program in general, or any program for that matter, is looking at non-dependence or being agnostic to everything that is out there. When we talk about roadside units, one of the devices in one of the slides I had earlier on, the roadside unit's purpose is exactly that. It extracts information from a traffic signal controller and broadcasts it, or pushes it out, I should say. The messages are pushed out on what is called DSRC, Dedicated Short Range Communication. Basically, any vehicle that enters into the zone within or in proximity to that location gets the message. So, in other words, we do not have to have cellular connectivity to the extent we think we need. I mean, of course, it is always important to have it. Having said that, the infrastructure that is already out there today can actually solve that issue. So, for example, when we talk about the SPAD projects, the signal phasing and timing, the red, yellow, green, for instance, does not require cellular connectivity. It takes the information from the controller, pushes it to the roadside unit, and the roadside unit broadcasts it out. So, technically speaking, it is possible, it is doable. In fact, rural connectivity and rural intelligent transportation system is emerging as a huge area because that is where the gaps are. And the question is absolutely right. And if we start putting a new focus area, that could be one right there. How to handle these transportation issues using emerging technologies in a rural environment. So, and we'll make sure that's a priority for the corridor and other projects as well.
All right, thank you, Doug and Raj. We're going to try to move on and try to get to the rest of the task force members here. Up next is Susan Ramsey, Gary Ritter, and Dr. Laurence Barrett. So Susan Ramsey representing the Florida Economic Development Council. Susan, any questions today?
I do not have any questions. I think they've all been answered, but it was great information and very exciting in the economic development world. So we'll be watching closely and looking forward to working and seeing what this brings, what opportunities this all brings. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. We'll go to Gary Ritter now, who is a substitute for our task force member, Charles Shin, with the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. So Gary, do you have any questions today?
Yeah, good morning. Just one quick comment. I wanted to thank all the panel members. Great discussion. Dr. Lilly, I'm glad to see the great work that the University of Florida is doing with the technology. In terms of the charging stations, coming from a rural area, I know, Doug, you said that you were kind of looking at those, I guess, through various Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, and Central Florida. But in rural areas, I'm kind of curious as to the cost of installing these types of stations, and I mean, are they expensive? Would they be able to, are there incentives for rural communities to install those stations and have them in? And then lastly, this may be for the entire group, and I may be watching too many movies, but what about the safety in the software? I mean, how, once you get autonomous vehicles on the road, what is the potential of somebody hijacking those things? That
All right, Jovan, do you want to touch base on that?
Yeah, I can address the last part of the question, or the second part of the question related to security. So we take that extremely seriously at Ford. And we have a whole organization that is actually focused on cybersecurity and the dangers of somebody hacking into our vehicles. One of the reasons why we're so excited about having the connectivity is to some extent also to prevent some of those kinds of things happening, or react to them as they happen and be able to very quickly update the software in our vehicles so that it's safe in case that there are any risks like that. But in general, we have been extremely focused on not just security but also privacy as a concern that we know our customers have when it comes to connectivity in general. So hopefully that answers the question.
Did any of the panelists want to touch base on the question or the comment in regards to the cost of the electronic or electric vehicle charging stations and so forth? I'm not for sure if that's something that you feel comfortable in jumping into, but is that something anybody wants to tackle? Or Doug?
Yeah, and the question was in the rural environment, and I think what we were driving at there is the cost prohibitive for electric vehicle charging. And there are several ways to approach that. You know, we talk a lot about level 3 DC fast charging and 50 kilowatts up to 250 kilowatts and above, which are very powerful and expensive machines. In a you know, in a rural environment, you can put in a 40 kilowatt level 2 charger, and you can probably do that for about $5,000 to $6,000. Also, in a rural environment, it can be less expensive to actually install one of these devices because you're not dealing with the barriers that you've got in an urban environment. You know, those being concrete, pavement, you know, electrical grid capacity concerns. So a lot of what you would be dealing with in the rural environment actually makes the job easier. And finally, there are some methodologies where you can deploy portable, you know, grid independent charging, or it can be hooked to the grid also, but they're portable units, and so you can deploy them, put them there for a period of time, look at the utilization and go, do we want to invest in a DC fast charger, or what is it that would work best here? So I see a lot of upside for the rural environment, and especially if you approach it from that perspective, that there are some fairly quick charging capabilities that are available and reasonably inexpensive equipment.
Very good. Thanks, Doug.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to go to Dr. Laurence Barrett, representing the Florida Gateway College. Do you have any questions, Dr. Barrett, for the panelists today?
No, I don't, but I want to thank the panel again for all their work. This has been very enlightening.
All right, thank you. Next three task force members, James Stansbury, Chris Rito, and Thomas Hawkins. James, we'll start with you, representing the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, James Stansbury. James, do you have any questions?
I do not today. I appreciate the opportunity and hope I get the chance to be in a crowd of over 10 to share some of the knowledge that I've learned today.
Very nice. You and me both. I'm about ready to get back to a little bit of normalcy. Chris Rito, representing the Appalachia Regional Planning Council. Any questions today?
No questions for me at this point. Just wanted to thank all the panelists for their very informative presentations. Thank you.
Very good. Thomas Hawkins, representing Thousand Friends of Florida. Thomas, any questions today?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I don't have any questions, but I have a couple of comments. The first one, in conjunction with thanking the panelists, is to say I sure am proud to be from Gainesville and proud to be a Florida Gator. Seeing everybody's presentations, in particular Raj's and Lily's, it's really great that we're able to have so much of this good work being done in Gainesville and at UF. The other comment that I want to make is to make sure that we think about these emerging technologies in context. They're really exciting, and they really have a potential to transform a lot of what we do, but we also can't forget the basics. You know, the cars that are being made today and in the next few decades that aren't connected or autonomous are going to be with us for a generation or more. We're still going to be having people riding bikes on our streets, walking on our streets. and we need to make sure our infrastructure caters to them. I definitely see the promise in these presentations for how these technologies can help, but we shouldn't forget things like reducing design speeds to improve safety, changing lane widths to make them less wide to improve safety. We're getting new arrows for our quiver, but we can't get rid of the ones that we already know are useful and that should remain part of our toolbox as we get more and more advanced and have more and more skills at our disposal.
Comment. All right, I'm going to mention the last four that we have: Commissioner Betsy Barfield, Ashley Stefanik, Pekin Hanrahan, and Audrey Kidwell. So representing Jefferson County County Commissioner Betsy Barfield. Commissioner, do you have any questions today for the panel?
No questions, and thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ashley Stefanik with the Swanee River Water Management District. Any questions today?
I don't have any questions today. Just wanted to thank the panel for their time.
Very good. Pekin Hanrahan, representing the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Any questions today?
Yeah, yes, good morning. This is Pekin Hanrahan, and I, like Thomas, he and I were elected officials together in Gainesville when the signal synchronization and transit systems were being built, so we're proud of that together. I do have a question about how this rich information technology can be applied to what I see as really our fundamental task here is assessing long-term planning for transportation systems and where need does or does not exist for moving vehicles. And I can only assume that the real-time data that assists with avoiding crashes and improving safety also can be of assistance in terms of figuring out exactly where people are wanting to go and from point to point and how best to get them there. I know obviously we all carry a optimization system in our phone for that. So I'd like to ask that question. And then my second question has to do with, I think the term that was used was a mixed vehicle fleet, having to do with the fact that some vehicles, as was just mentioned, will still be less advanced than others for some period of time to come. And I also have a question sort of that builds off of that, if you look at how the Brightline system has been implemented in Southeast Florida, it appears from someone who is not at all expert in these areas that there is something of a disconnect between a high speed or more advanced rail system and the more traditional roadway system that it's being superimposed on. And so I'm wondering, is what we're seeing in terms of crashes at the grade crossings and so on, at least in part because of this period of trying to integrate together different types of transportation systems that may or may not be on the same technology wavelength, I guess. So I'll stop with those two questions.
All right, Dr. Lilly, is that something that you can address as far as regarding one of those two questions? Oh, Dr. Lilly, I think you may be muted.
Yeah, thank you. With respect to transferability of technology, I think that the applications expands to a variety of facilities, from urban streets to freeways, and so I think that this is something that will have to be worked out.
Jovan?
Going back to the theme of this this panel, emerging technologies. One thing that we have learned the hard way at Ford is that while emerging technologies bring wealth of new opportunities, they also come with some challenges, particularly in being able to maintain the pace. What we are seeing is a relentless pace in change in these technologies. And one of the things that we have to learn to do as a society is how do we keep up with that pace and without dropping things on the way. As these technologies evolve, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there will be other technologies that are now old that we have to take care of. So it's a very, very good question. I don't think that there's a silver bullet for answering that one. It just that it teaches us that we have to be a lot more sensitive to the fact that these technologies evolve.
And rounding out, Trey.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The first priority here for Florida DOT is safety. So the great thing about these technologies, particularly the CAV technologies, is that they improve safety regardless of the mixed fleet. Because what you're doing is you're using technology to enhance what humans cannot detect sensor-wise. So the safety benefit is there right away. It's the mobility benefit that will come, in my opinion, after that, a little later, because you do have the mixed fleet. There will be some mobility advantages right away with things like signalization, freight priority, transit priority with signals. Some of the things you mentioned, traveler information, giving that information to more drivers. But some of the mobility benefits, such as shorter headways between vehicles, those are going to take longer to get to. Thank you.
Well, very good. Thanks, thanks panel for that. Audrey Kidwell, representing Volunteer Florida. Audrey, do you have any questions?
Hello, this is Audrey, and no, I do not have any further questions. Thank you, panelists. Okay.
I do want to go back real quick. There were a few task force members who were having audio problems before when we went to them. So anyway, Randy Wilkerson, representing the Florida Rural Water Association. Do you have any questions today, Randy?
No questions, Greg. I think they were all covered about the corridor widths and safety aspects covered by FWC. And of course, the rural area, the communication for the vehicle automation was great. So thank you all panelists for a great presentation. Very informative. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Randy. I think we had some audio issues with Commissioner Scott Carnahan representing Citrus County Commission. Commissioner Carnahan, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm here. Again, I want to thank the panel for being here today and giving us the information. I don't have any questions, but very informative. Thank you.
Very good. And then last, I've got Commissioner Ronald Kitchen, who represents the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Commissioner Kitchen, do you have any questions today for the panel?
No, I don't. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay. Also, Lyle Sigler, representing Northwest Florida Water Management District. Lyle, do you have any questions today? Okay, still some audio issues there, I guess. So, Charles Lee, I know that you had some other comments that you wanted to bring up. Because of the time frame and the fact that we are a little bit behind where we needed to be for public comments, I'm going to ask if it's okay if you could just email those comments to Ryan Asmus, and we will get back in touch with you or distribute to the task force, depending on how that needs to be. I apologize about that, but just with the timing of everything, we have run a little long. So we want to make for sure for the people who did sign up for public comment that we can get to their comments. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Evans for some next steps.
All right, thank you, Greg. And
you know, I was bragging on you earlier, and here we are about 40 minutes over schedule, so I'm gonna have to have a little discussion with you. You know, y'all know how I am about timing, and I do apologize to the public that want to make public comment for our overrun in time. I want to thank our panelists, very, very informative. I appreciate the question that came in from our task force members. Been a very informative morning. So just to recap a few things, next step before we go into public comment. First, today's presentation and webinar recording will be posted on the website. Secondly, we anticipate scheduling another webinar during the first week of June to discuss emergency response, recovery, and resiliency considerations related to transportation corridors. And finally, we'll be in touch with you soon as we have a sense of the timing future in-person meetings. So with that, that concludes our formal presentation for today. We'll now move into public comment portion for our webinar. And I want to continue to emphasize how important public input is for us. So with that, Greg, if you're ready, sir, we will begin the public comment period for today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just would like to, before we hit the public comment, just to remind the task force members. So, you know, like we did in webinar 1, we were planning to have the raised hand and go back through, but just because the discussion was so good today, and again, I appreciate the panelists for their participation today, and thank you, task force members, for asking some great questions. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna move on to public comment, but if there are any questions that you have that you were maybe holding to the raised hand portion that maybe we were gonna have like we did last time, if you would just email those questions to Ryan Asmus. Again, his email is ryan.asmus@dot.state.fl.us, and we'll be sure to get a response back to you in regards to today's presentation. We're now going to move into the public comment period. We have received 24 requests to provide public comment, which should take a little over an hour. As always, we encourage everyone to stay engaged during this portion of the webinar. Requests to comment that were received by 5 p.m. yesterday will be addressed during the public comment period in the order the request was made. If you do not respond when you are called, we will provide a second chance at the end of the public comment period. We will identify the next 3 speakers so that you may be prepared to comment when your name is called to actually speak. We will unmute your line in order for you to provide your comment within your allotted 3 minutes. You will hear a tone when you have 30 seconds remaining, and then another tone when your time is up. The line will be muted after 3 minutes, so please keep your eye on the clock and listen for those tones. If you have more information to share with the group or did not submit your request in time to be able to speak today, you can provide additional comments in writing for further consideration anytime by sending an email to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. So just remember that if you have self-muted yourself, please be sure to unmute before speaking. Our first 3 speakers today are Ryan Smart, Lindsay Cross, and Christian Wagley. Ryan Smart from Jacksonville, you are unmuted. Okay. Lindsay Cross, you are unmuted.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Good morning. This is Lindsay Cross. I'm with Florida Conservation Voters. Today, we are asking DOT to halt the MCORS process until it can be done in a more transparent manner that encourages meaningful public participation. Webinars and private phone calls with task force members reek of bad government and the sham process that this is. At the April 30th Suncoast webinar, the success rate for giving a comment was a dismal 23%. Only 38 out of 162 participants that had signed up in advance were actually able to give comments. Frustratingly, many sat on the phone for hours to give their 3 minutes of comment, but were unable to get through. For those that were successful, 37 of 38 spoke against the roads to ruin. At that same webinar, there was no mention of the second round of webinars. Instead, DOT discussed how in-person meetings were preferable and would likely resume in June. Members of the public that had proactively signed up for meeting notifications through the MCOR's website were not alerted about this meeting until 5:01 on Friday afternoon. This is for a Tuesday morning meeting with a Monday 5 p.m. sign-up deadline. In the meantime, there have been private phone conversations between DOT staff, consultants, and the task force members to solicit feedback on the maps. Those discussions are not available to the public, and important background materials were not provided prior to the webinar either, making it very difficult for the public to review and provide meaningful feedback. Attendance for this webinar is lower, and that includes both task force members and everyday Floridians who are concerned about the devastating impacts of these roads. That is why the Florida Conservation Voters has started a petition to halt this process. Already more than 800 people have signed on. This project is bad for our water, wildlife, public health, agriculture, rural communities, and taxpayers. It deserves to be fully vetted, not rushed through when people's lives and livelihoods are threatened. Proceeding with the Roads to Ruin project as is in a time of unprecedented crisis is an act of bad government and a waste of our taxpayer dollars. We respectfully ask that you put the brakes on the MCOR process and allow the 2021 legislature to revisit this project when there is more information regarding the anticipated and severe budget shortfalls during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Christian Wagley from Pensacola, Florida.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Kristen Dozier, I've been with Healthy Golf. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to the Gulf of Mexico and the waterways and communities along its shores. We engage with thousands of members and supporters in all 5 Gulf of Mexico states, including all along the Florida Gulf Coast. We strongly believe that the only viable recommendation for this task force is no build. The environmental damages from crossing streams and rivers, filling wetlands, and facilitating sprawl into rural areas of our state will have tremendously negative impacts on the health of our rivers, bays, and the Gulf of Mexico. And specifically, the coastal areas downstream of the Suncoast connector corridor are some of the most pristine in the whole state. Those areas depend on clean, fresh water flowing from inland areas. In fact, the state legislature has already recognized this with the creation of the Nature Coast Aquatic Reserve, and also the Big Bend Seagrass Aquatic Reserve, which is actually the largest aquatic reserve in the state. These proposed toll roads remind me of the transportation project in Northwest Florida that followed a similar path. It's the Garson Point Bridge in San Jose County. Nicknamed Bose Bridge, you could just push right in Florida House Superboat Johnson's own land on the northern side of the bridge. The traffic studies used to justify the bridge's construction vastly overstated the traffic count, which the consultants later admitted. 20 years after the bridge's opening, it's used little use today, with a lawsuit between the bondholders and FDOT, or the FDOT failure to raise tolls as requested, and the bridge is still $100 million in debt. All of this because the bridge promoters first decided they wanted a bridge, then they tried to create a process that would justify it. These proposed toll roads are following that same scenario. Considering the fact that these roads have little support in the communities they would cross and the environmental damages they would cause, Healthy Gulf asked the task force members to present no build as the only viable option. We pledge to actively engage our members and supporters around this issue for the remainder of this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Kim Wheeler from Williston, Florida.
And I agree with Lindsay Cross. I really don't like the format that we're at. The last meeting basically provided no information to the residents who are going to have to suffer through this process. Today, the CATV information was interesting, but work within the cities and the congested areas, and please leave our rural and open spaces alone. We all need food. We need farms and ranches and orchards. We need land and water. Do we really need more roads? I think not. I hope this pandemic makes us rethink our priorities. Christopher C. Krebs, the Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, points out that food and agriculture workers are essential during the COVID-19 response. He's part of Homeland Security, and the list of workers is extensive. Here in Florida, we have 47,500 farms with an average size of 204 acres. The USDA reports that receipts from Florida agricultural products in 2017 totaled $7.64 billion, second only to tourism in value to our economy. Driving around, you see that much of our land in Levy County, 23%, is devoted to pasture for cattle, horses, goats, and sheep. We also have approximately 42% of our land devoted to crops, of which 25% is in timber. Our pine forests are a carbon sink that helps stabilize our environment in the face of climate change. These working farms and ranches contribute to the peace and quiet that we enjoy. Blue skies over fields are healthy and visually pleasing. I much prefer our rural communities to the noise and pollution of more built-up areas. Most of the people who live in these rural areas agree with me. The coronavirus should help us understand what is truly important. We know that this virus is more deadly for older people and for people who live in areas with air pollution. We know that agriculture is critical to our security. We all need food. Do we want a toll road paving over our fields and farms? Do we want our air quality to degrade with all the cars and trucks traveling on these roads? Do we want the development that follows? I think not. Rural Levy says no to toll roads. Financially, these toll roads and the M-Ports process makes no sense. It is not data-driven, especially now with the revenue shortfall from the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to actually stop the task force and repeal this flawed legislation. Let's put our tax dollars to work for the benefit of all people and not just the developers. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next up is Eugene Kelly.
Yes. Hello, thank you.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I have spoken to the task force previously about prescribed burning needs in the study area for the Suncoast connector, and I want to follow up with some additional points on that. And ultimately, what I want to suggest is that all current state-owned conservation lands should be part of the will not impact list. Gothi is an example of one that of a state-owned conservation land that has been put in the no new corridors category, and I think that is entirely insufficient. And any lands that the state has already invested in conserving should be considered will not impact unless some kind of detailed assessment on a case-by-case basis would indicate otherwise. In the case of Gothi, I would like to go back again to prescribed burning needs on that particular property. I did submit to each and every task force member a report back in February, a summary of prescribed fire usage and needs across the MCOR Suncoast connector study area. I documented over 18,500 burn authorizations had been issued within that corridor by the Florida Forest Service in the past 10 years. Just using Gothi as an example, their burn plan for 2020 calls for targeting over 17,000 acres for prescribed burning. Nearly all of it's designated as a high priority for fire. And the real impediment to them being able to do those burns is road traffic. I included in that report a hypothetical burn scenario in Gothi State Forest, and it indicated a burn authorization could not have been issued under those particular circumstances. I ran the same kind of smoke screening model today, the same result. The truth is, that's the result most days of the year. The real impediment to doing prescribed burning is having enough burn days where the winds and other weather conditions make it safe to conduct those burns. There are very few such windows of opportunity on all these conservation lands. right now, that no new corridors approach to Gothi would really be inadequate to protect this property. Any additional east-west corridors, in addition to the US 19 that runs north and south, you basically tie their hands every day of the year. They can't burn with east, north, south, or west winds. It's just unacceptable, and I think you need to place Gothi into that category of will not impact.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Your time is up. Up next is Jim Tatum from Tampa, Florida. Mr. Tatum, I need you to enter your PIN. It has been sent to you. We will circle back to you. Next up is Michael Kroll from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Next up is Matthew Schwartz from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, and thanks for hearing these comments. So I heard in the beginning, Matthew Schwartz, by the way, director of the South Florida Wildlands Association, but working statewide on wildlife and habitat issues. The gentleman from FWC expressed some concerns about wildlife and how the technology discussed today can help. And I'd like to ask a question. I'm not going to get an answer to it, but I'm going to ask her it anyway. Is there any question that a new highway passing through this area, the Florida Nature Coast, that contains 96 pieces of public lands between Tampa and Tallahassee, that also serve as habitat for dozens of state and federally protected wildlife species, are going to be worse off with these highways, no matter what kind of safety features we're building into it? It's a rhetorical question that you and the agency might want to consider as you make final recommendations for this task force. While we don't know, somebody said that, we don't know how the technology is going to develop, we do have years of environmental and wildlife science, and most importantly, Florida history, that has revealed lots of things we absolutely do know. A question for the task force as a whole: is there anyone in this task force that believes that a new highway from the current end of the Suncoast Parkway to the Florida-Georgia border is going to be good for the natural resources of this area? The answer is no, but you can answer that on your own. New roads and highways. One, new roads and highways fragment wildlife habitat. From toads to Florida panthers and black bears, they isolate wildlife populations from each other and from their food supply, whether that food is plants, seeds, or live prey. And they leave wildlife populations genetically isolated and far more susceptible to extinction. I'm going to quote from the FWC's own Wildlife 2060 report. This report was written when Florida's population was only 18 million, and they projected a doubling of the population to 36 million by the year 2060. I thought it was a joke at the time. We're actually going in that direction. But here's the quote from the Florida Wildlife 2060 report, discussing the implications. Additional highways. Give me 1 second. For wildlife, this means that their remaining habitats will come to be islands within an urban sea, and these disconnected fragments of habitat will support reduced populations of animals and plants more vulnerable to extinction as their genetic viability declines. Additional highways and additional traffic, this is done with a quote, additional highways and additional traffic on these highways and adjacent roadways due to increased populations are also sure to lead to increased roadkill. And we have lots of data to indicate that will happen no matter what the technology is used. We know from 100 years, more than 100 years of recent Florida history, that transportation corridors, whether they're roads, highways, or railroads, create new development. Everywhere highways are built and transportation corridors are built, we have sprawl. MCORS refers to that sprawl in a very different way. They call that kind of revitalization of the rural areas that most of the residents of these rural areas, by the way, don't want. And that's a problem with this process in general.
Thank
you.
The
development that's going. Okay, thank you.
Next up is Neil Fleckenstein from Tallahassee, Florida. Neil, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Neil Fleckenstein, Tall Timbers Research Station. We really appreciate the efforts that DOT and the consultants are making to try and include public participation. Unfortunately, I have to agree with a number of the comments that Lindsay made earlier. And that's just one of the challenges with technology. You know, the previous meeting, we had so many speakers that were unable to provide comments, including a number that I personally spoke with who really wanted to do so, folks who were directly affected by MCORs. This meeting, I kind of had the same challenge that other speakers had. I didn't receive the notice until Friday after 5 o'clock, and basically had one business day to register and then to encourage others to do so. And that's just a real challenge. And I really think it's not adequate for public notice for really what's such an important issue. While I'm thinking about public participation, you know, once we can all gather in larger groups, God willing, we really need to hopefully reschedule the Jefferson County Task Force meeting. I think that's a community that was really looking forward to being able to provide direct public comment and public input to the task force. So hopefully when we can do that, I would really encourage the rescheduling of that meeting. And then just the comments that I offered about 2 weeks ago, I didn't quite get a chance to talk about map comments. And I know mapping has been an important topic here, so I just wanted to offer a few follow-up map comments. I agree with an earlier speaker. In the will not impact category, I think one of the most important data layers is the managed conservation lands data layer from FNA. That includes lands with conservation easements, federal and state parks, refuges, wildlife management areas, etc. None of these lands were ever intended to have new roadways put through them. We work exclusively with folks giving us conservation easements, and I know that is not anywhere in their plans, is the concept of having a new roadway through their property. So please add that managed conservation lands layer to the will not impact category. Another recommendation for that category is the category 1 through 5 storm surge. Again, these are our most vulnerable areas in the state, and our state is one of the most vulnerable in the country to tropical weather. So those two layers would be very desirable to add to the will not impact. And then on the no new roads through category, we'd recommend the Florida Ecological Greenways, priorities 1 through 3, CLIP version 4.0, the aggregated priorities model, and then finally the priority springs focal areas. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein. Up next is Amy Datz from Tallahassee, Florida. Amy, you are unmuted. Amy, you are self-muted if you'll unmute on your end.
Okay, is that good?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay, I would like to say that in my experience, the Florida DOT has won many national and international awards for excellence in their design and build for protection of wildlife and natural resources. The latest accomplishment was the Wekiva Parkway project. I view this project as the Suncoast MCOR project as E cubed: energy, environment, and economy. The energy will be generated and charging stations for solar powered trains, buses, and cars, advancing the 2040 100% renewable city and county state plans through these technologies. In the environment, this roadway will reduce air pollution through congestion management, wildlife crossings, and reduction of stormwater and septic tank pollution. Also adding amazing bicycle and pedestrian alternatives. You can ride your bike from Jefferson County to Tampa. It'll also, through economy, the third E, increased movement of freight and services. $5 billion savings a year for the public because of truck congestion. Reducing childhood poverty and unemployment, providing 700,000 Floridians with internet. This bill provides funding to train local people in trades like carpenters, construction of large equipment, mechanics, engineers, plumbers, steel fitters, and so on in the trades. But also I can see on a very high level of technology, they'll have to have all kinds of people working with the advanced technology going on in this project. This broadband and water sewer connectivity will not only improve their quality of life, but will reduce the air pollution because they can use telemedicine, telecommuting, and online education. Currently, most of the area is on septic tanks. These have an adverse impact on our springs. With development, central sewage and stormwater management will be implemented, protecting and enhancing our spring system. The energy distribution, because of the toll roads, I'm supporting portable solar charging stations in the alternate fuel corridors. I'd like to see these portable solar stations all over the state. I know there's new legislation for them, and I just hope that you can contact your legislator and ask them to increase the number of portable solar charging stations to be used on this project. So thank you very much, and I'm very glad you're doing this.
Thank you. Next up is Mary Lou Foster from Lamont, Florida. Mary Lou, you are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Hello? Oh, good. I'm calling to voice my concerns about this toll road. I'm very, very much against it. I agree with all those very articulate people who voiced the Florida conservation voters, tall timbers who voiced their opposition to the project. There's many, many reasons why this road should not go through. The devastation of forests, water resources, wildlife, farmland, and rural downtowns, for starters. It would inhibit the ability to use prescribed fire to maintain natural resources and reduce wildfire risk. State Road Highway 19 already exists in the path of the proposed toll road and is currently underused. And the cost to construct the toll road would be a colossal waste. It is clear to most Jefferson County residents that South Florida may be taking advantage of the natural resources in Jefferson County and the thoughtful planning and stewardship of its residents. Our property we put under conservation with the Nature Conservancy, and we've planted 2,500,000 longleaf pine trees that are now almost to their mature state, and all that would be for naught. So please take a long, hard look at who would operate the toll road and who stands to benefit from it. It is very clear that Jefferson County and its residents would certainly not benefit in any way, shape, or form from such a horrific and senseless and destructive project. And I also agree with everyone that the whole thing should be suspended until after the COVID crisis, that we've gotten through it. This whole public comment arrangement with webinars, people are having trouble getting in. The last meeting I couldn't get in to speak. And also you're putting it at a time, 9:30 to noon, during the middle of the day when a lot of people are working, believe it or not, whether it's from home or now back in their offices, and you can't have public comment like this. It reeks. It really smells bad. Thank you for letting me voice my concerns.
Thank you for your comment. Up next is Mable Patterson from Riverview, Florida.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mable Patterson. I'm from Riverview, Florida. I do not represent any organization, but I have been following this process since the beginning in Tampa. I think this is the worst idea the state of Florida has come up with since the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And I will tell you why. The first reason is the misuse of natural resources. Other commenters have been able to state that better than I can, but it's clear that the environmental impacts will lead to destruction and degradation of our water resources, our agricultural and timberlands, and our wildlife habitat. I also believe that this is a misuse of our financial resources. I am a taxpayer. I pay my taxes and I expect a return on that investment. And I don't think this is a good return. All of the stated goals of MCORS could be done better, more efficiently. That includes connectivity, transportation needs, and evacuation routes by not building these roads. If pavement equaled progress, then the North Central Florida area should already be a boom area because you put I-10 through there a few decades ago. How has that impacted those local communities? Has it brought this big boom in industry and development? No. You have I-75 just to the east. 19 is almost unused north of Crystal River. There are transportation needs in the state, but these are not the transportation needs. And finally, I would like to say that this is a misuse of our human resources. The task force process has taken how many hundreds of man hours from the Department of Transportation staffers, from the task force members themselves, who have to go to these meetings every month. I'm sure that there are more important things, especially in this time of crisis for our economy, than sitting around discussing hypothetical roads to serve hypothetical people and that serve none of the financial, the environmental uses of Floridians, real Floridians. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Up next is Lita Weingart from Old Town, Florida. Lita, we are showing you're not connected to audio. We'll circle back. Up next is Karen Jurock from Tampa, Florida. Karen, you're unmuted.
My name is Karen, and I live in Hillsborough County, about a mile from the Suncoast Highway. I chose my home near the toll road because it's a convenient travel method that is faster than any other north-south corridor in my region. I'm generally supportive of MCORS. The pandemic we are experiencing now represents a paradigm shift in how we interact in our public square, the way 9/11 was to airline travel. This makes MCOR's goal of broadband improvements in rural areas even more necessary to facilitate increased telecommuting. One area of concern for me is initiating new passenger rail modes of travel, and I want you to consider safety, mobility, cost, and impedance of freight due to passenger rail in future deliberations. When this virus broke out, Hillsborough County advised the public early on to avoid riding public transit for their safety. We learned that buses and passenger trains are the biggest vector of germ transmission in New York City, where data from mid-April showed 1,900 transit employees in New York City had tested positive for coronavirus, which is about 3 times the rate for New York City as a whole. And sadly, a month ago, I'm sure even more since, 50 of them had died at that point. I'd like to challenge the notion mentioned today that mass transit is safer. In Florida, we have 2 passenger rail services. Sunrail is a commuter rail system on purchased CSX tracks that opened in 2014, and Sunrail tragically has a horrific safety record. Last year, the fatality rate calculated that for every 1 billion passenger miles traveled, Sunrail is on track to cause 165 deaths. Brightline is the private passenger rail started 2 years ago, and it has seen a fatality rate of 250 fatalities per billion passenger miles. For comparison, the average fatality rate for automobiles in cities is about 8. The passenger rail experience in Florida is not something we want to clone. To the point transit is cheaper, it's really much more expensive overall. Take Sunrail. While the fare is only $2 each way, that's only what the rider pays. The actual cost per trip to taxpayers in 2018 is $42 each way, or an astounding $84 a day per commuter. It would be cheaper to buy the few Sunrail riders their own car and gas. Even cheaper would be to provide free Uber service to these riders than operating a rail service. You might ask whether passenger rail is helpful for hurricane evacuation. No, not at all. Passenger rail must cease service once winds reach 35 miles per hour, For rail, it shut down a couple of days before the hurricane hits to safely batten down the railroad crossings, which means passenger rail is typically shut down 3 to 4 days beforehand. And this was the case for Tri-Rail in Miami, Sunrail in Orlando, and the streetcar in Tampa, all shut down for several days before and after the hurricane threatened the area. So passenger rail is not a solution for one of MCOR's stated goals of hurricane evacuation. So to conclude, I am a fan, of the MCOR's concept, but I want to throw out the caution flag on passenger rail along the corridor. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Up next is Mary Lee Jimson from Fort White, Florida. Mary Lee, you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Are
Yes,
you there? Okay, thank you. While I appreciate certain technological advancements that were discussed today, we are at a critical juncture in our planet's evolution. Ecosystem demise and extinction are on an extraordinary curve unto themselves. Transportation corridors are extremely problematic for the health and well-being of the last remaining Florida wetland habitats. This is a no-build project, a boondoggle, a waste of money, and a waste to Florida. The pandemic has begun to teach us about our crucial anthropogenic impacts to air quality, water quality, and quality of human health within the natural Earth's ecosystems. Do not ruin what's left of our great watery state. This is not the time to be moving forward with this MCORS project. It needs to be put on the back burner until we can figure out how we as humans can live with our natural systems in place and intact and without more significant harm to the ecosystems themselves. This is a no-build project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gibson. Up next is Michael McGrath from Fort Myers, Florida. Michael, you are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Great. My name is Michael McGrath. I'm an organizer for the Sierra Club on our Red Tide and also Wildlands campaign. We currently find ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic. As of yesterday, there were close to 41,000 cases and 1,735 deaths from the coronavirus in Florida alone. Many people are currently fighting for their lives or are worried about protecting themselves from immediate threats that COVID-19 poses. The ability to consider longer-term environmental threats such as these proposed toll roads is extremely limited. As task force members and FDOT staff, you must consider the state of emergency that we find ourselves in and respond accordingly. It is ludicrous to expect a normal public engagement response during this planning process. I urge each of you to consult your conscience and ask yourself this question. Why are we still rushing a process to build a series of tollways that will permanently change the character of our state for generations to come in the midst of a global pandemic? There are simply more pressing needs in our communities that should be the object of our attention. It is unnecessary to rush a planning process that will have immense environmental impacts and huge fiscal costs. Even the perfect webinar with no technological glitches cannot replace in-person public hearings. This is inherent to our values as a democracy and our constitutional rights to assemble. These webinars are a far cry from what democracy looks like in action. If you really value the public that you intend to serve, then you call the MCORS process off immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. Up next is Herman Younger from Gainesville, Florida.
Hello.
Sir, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
From the beginning, the MCORS process has been opaque and fruitless. These webinars have further highlighted the recklessness of this pursuit to build toll roads that only benefit private interests and polluters. FDOT's claim that it values the input of the public is a poorly disguised facade. The overwhelming public outcry against these new roads has been ignored and covered up. This process is undemocratic and Florida taxpayers deserve better. This is highway robbery. We urge you to change direction now. The only legitimate option is a no-build recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Younger. Up next is Dee Darling. You are unmuted, Ms.
Thank you.
For those task force members that are still on, and by the looks of the screen, we're well under 50%. I want to make sure that everybody understands that Atkins, who was given a $44 million contract by Florida Department of Transportation to advocate for this project, is spoon feeding you positive aspects of MCORS. If I were a task force member, I would ask Florida Department of Transportation to give me a briefing on Florida Statutes 338.221, the economic feasibility of these toll roads. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Darling. Up next is Julie Conley from Monticello, Florida. Julie, you're on.
Thank you. I appreciate today's focus on emerging technology in transportation, but my comments are directed more to the overall impacts of the toll road in Jefferson County. As a local elected official for many years, I've seen firsthand how the decisions made in Tallahassee can impact people and institutions in my community, but I'm only speaking today as a private citizen. I recognize the need to relieve traffic congestion in other parts of Florida, but I believe locating the terminus of the toll road in Jefferson County would, first of all, create the need for additional highway infrastructure to move traffic north, because our courthouse sits right in the middle of the intersection of highways 90 and 19 in a roundabout. This roundabout is fine for local and commercial traffic, but it could not accommodate all the vehicles exiting the toll road south of Monticello and trying to get north. So that would require a bypass, and that would wreak havoc on our downtown. There have been a lot of private and public dollars invested in our local downtown area over the past few years. In fact, there's a beautification project underway right now by the city. So what we should be doing is all we can to attract customers to that area and not dump them onto a bypass around it. I'm concerned that it would require local dollars to be spent on increased law enforcement and other essential services. And I'm concerned about the increase in development pressure along the corridor and a loss of our agricultural lands, and just generally a change in the overall character of Monticello and Jefferson County. And as I mentioned at task force meeting, I think it was number 2, I'm very concerned about the adverse impacts on the natural and cultural and archaeological resources in the Osceola River watershed. Neither I nor a lot of other people around here think that the avoid, minimize, mitigate, enhance planning tool will be enough to fully protect that area. And finally, it's very disturbing to me that a project of this magnitude has not followed established protocols, including long-range planning, sociocultural analysis, and other practices typically used to produce a very transparent, analytical set of data that would support the need for a toll road, especially one that ends in Jefferson County. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conley, for your comment. Currently, we have 9 people not signed in or didn't connect in a manner that we could recognize their attendance. So at this time, that concludes our public comment. Thank you for attending our webinar.